Hello, David Zritsky for the Bond Experience. Welcome back. Okay, we're revisiting a topic that many people have spoken about. And if you haven't spoken about it, chances are you've consumed some information around the Ian Fleming publications editing of the Ian Fleming books. Now, some of you already 3 seconds into here are saying, nah, David, come on. It's not truly editing. It's changing just a couple things. It's a storm in a teacup. Many of you are saying, well, come on, no, it's more than editing, it's censorship. And that's what we're here to talk about. There's a lot of different opinions, a lot of different extremes. Some of you may be absolutely fine with this and say, is it really a big deal? Maybe it's just another way that more people can imbibe the Ian Fleming literary works and get to know James Bond for all ages and all sensitivities. Some of you may be saying, well, this is ridiculous. This is artwork. And then some of you actually may have a cultural connection to the edits and opinions. And so guess what, folks? I'm no longer ranting and raving at a computer by myself. Well, in a way I am, but I'm still inviting some people on. First one is a good friend of mine who we met for the first time last year, but we've been following each other for a long time. Ladies and gentlemen, Fletcher, welcome to the show.
Hey, David. Thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it.
I'm so happy to have you on. And judging by your background, like me, you're a pretty big Bond fan.
Absolutely. That's a huge understatement. I'm a massive Bond fan, as you know. I think this whole 60th anniversary and obviously now the 70th anniversary with the novels has really just kind of skyrocketed things. So yeah, my enthusiasm for Bond is just, it just keeps growing and growing and growing.
And I remember when we met, we were sharing kind of the fact that we've been kind of following each other through the years, and this is always a nice, great way to connect. So thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. My pleasure.
All right, get your opinion cap on because we're going to want your opinion, but not just yours. Yes, I have some other friends, some a little bit more local than you. We've got Joe Darlington from Being James Bond. Welcome back, Joe.
What's happening, fellas? How are you?
Hey, Joe.
We're good.
Hey, Fletch. How are you?
Not too bad.
Joe, it's very strange for me to be talking to you and you're not in my basement.
It's very true. Seriously. How did I end up here? It's crazy.
I don't know. We miss you, man. We miss you. But by the way, Joe has, let's kick this off a little bit before we invite our next guest. You obviously did have some content creation around this very subject, didn't you?
I did. Yeah, I figured everybody's talking about it. Don't let this one slip by. And it did sort of fall into a theme that I was sort of toying with at the time. The times they are changing. And frankly, I felt like when this happened, I said, oh, this is even more close to that theme. So let me jump in. Like this was very literal, or close to literal as you can get. So yeah, had a few opinions. So I'm happy to regurgitate it.
And I'm curious to see, and maybe this is just a theory, I'm wondering if, because there's been so many consumable moments out there by other content creators and articles, if your opinion has changed since you've released the video. But don't give it yet, because we still got to invite one more person to this party, somebody who's never short on sharing their opinions, thank goodness, because it makes us smile, laugh, and sometimes, yes, even think. We've got Calvin Dyson. Welcome, Calvin.
Hello, everyone. Hi, good evening. Thanks for inviting me on, David.
Hey, Calvin.
Absolutely.
Hey, Calvin.
Hey, Joe. Hey, Fletcher.
Hey.
All right. So listen, here's how we're going to play this game. There's a lot of people watching right now, kind of craning in. We've got to start and lay the foundation. And so without getting into too many details, I'd like to do a kind of a Rorschach test with everybody. When you heard individually that these new editions in the 70th anniversary of these literary works were going to be edited, whether you consider them slight edits or deeper cuts, what was your sort of visceral initial reactions? Fletcher, why don't you go first?
I think mine was like, why? And, what's next? Because, we had it with Roald Dahl. And then, of course, now it's happening to Bond. I mean, I've got a closer affinity to Bond than I do Roald Dahl. But it was just like, why is this happening? Again, they're targeting Bond. And then what else is going to, what's coming next? And so I had this wave of anger, like, wash over me. But then I sort of had to kind of temper myself, temper my emotions and try to think rationally. But then that didn't last long, because it was like, okay, this is supposed to be a 70th anniversary, so it's supposed to be a celebration. But then it now felt like they were kind of apologizing for something that's been going on for 70 years. It's not like it's 7 months, it's 70 years. So there's an evolution where things were one way, and we've experienced the journey from, the 1950s up till now. But they want to kind of like, poo-poo all over that. So I just threw my hands up in the air and I was fed up.
Well, that'll be our show for today. Thanks for joining us, everybody. What's more to say? That's amazing. But that's good. And I'm going to ask you pretty soon, all of you, how much did you then investigate to see what the changes are? But Joe, initial reaction, how did you find out about it? And what was your initial reaction?
Good question. I don't remember specifically which was my first, who told me first, hey, have you heard yet? But it was funny because, again, we had just had the Roald Dahl edits, censorship, however you want to call it, like a week earlier. And honestly, the first thought that came to my mind was, oh, they're going to go after Fleming. They're going to go after Fleming real quick, real hard, because I feel like, the Roald Dahl to me was sort of silly because, again, as I said in my commentary, particularly my brain went to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory or Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and I said that the whole point of that story is a cautionary tale, about kids who misbehave and the things you do will lead to trouble. And in one case, the kid was chubby because he ate too much. So if you take that out, well, what's left? So I thought I was already sort of on that kick, like, oh my goodness, this is so silly. And I felt like no sooner did I finish, like I hadn't even completed the thought, and all of a sudden there it was. Oh, Fleming books are going to come out with edits and stuff. So I was like, oh brother, here we go. And I kind of did the eye roll, and I think that my my diplomatic nature kind of got the better of me in a way, and I kind of was like, I have a little mushy view on it, so I kind of tend to go back and forth on it. But again, we'll talk about it. But yeah, initially that was sort of my it was almost like I knew this was coming, and
you
like
weren't
clockwork,
surprised.
not in the slightest, honestly.
Yeah,
just a matter of time, really.
Calvin, you did a video. You actually had a video come out, but before that, was it days before before the video that you found out, and what was your initial reaction?
Much the same as Fletcher and Joe, I suppose. It was kind of, you immediately read something like this and you just want to investigate everything. I might be getting ahead of your questions here, but I was just kind of wanting to know as much about this as I could possibly know, because I think the whole culture war thing is such like a big and nasty aspect of just media in general these days that it's kind of like, I don't even know if I want to dip my toe into, touching on that. I think, because Joe, I know in your podcast as well, you said something similar about like, you don't want to get political when it comes to Bond, because this is a hobby for us all. And why do you want to put up, opinions or a video or a podcast or an article that's just going to get people just having a go at you no matter what, having a go at each other in the comments. And it does just become a bit of a nasty thing. With this one, I suppose maybe it's, after I started going through and reading the, the specific changes and whatnot, I was kind of thinking like, I don't, maybe this is my own naivety speaking, but I was kind of like, you know what? I don't even know if I think of this as a political thing, I guess, because it is, censorship in any form, I think is a bad thing. If you're removing something from just circulation, existence, or whatever, fine. If they were going to reprint other versions and have them available side by side and people had the choice, David, you might well know more about this than me, because I think that probably will still be the case in a lot of ways. I don't think they're completely removing the original versions from circulation. But yeah, no, I was just kind of, just why, wanted to know more. And I didn't like the sound of it, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. So it's interesting, and I think this was done sort of on purpose, but you're getting a feel of it. The viewers right now is you've got people in different camps. We're not all sitting here, kind of waving at the cloud, and the storm is still coming. I haven't really talked about the journey that I had in finding out about this, but I found out about this when it was put into the article online, and people started obviously sharing it with me, and I read the first article. And I was very down and bummed because about 2 weeks before that, Ian Fleming Publications had reached out to me and said, we're going to let you own a cover on your channel. And they were going to let me own For Your Eyes Only. So my channel was going to be the only one in the world to release the cover of For Your Eyes Only, the one with the hummingbird on it. And, there was pomp and circumstance around it. I was going to get some unique graphics. And I'm like, this is so cool. This is my way to celebrate the 70th anniversary. And as soon as I saw that, all I could think about was, I don't know if I can get behind this. And then I said to like Fletcher did, and I think Calvin, you did as well, and Joe, I said, all right, calm down. You want to do a video right away, don't do a video right away. And people were saying why aren't you talking about this, David? And I said, I need to ask them what's been changed. So I did. Now, because I was associated with the cover, they gave me quite a bit of information, more than they posted, about what was changed. And then when I realized it wasn't just a few terms that would have been changed, it wasn't just that, there were entire passages, and there were things that were omitted and taken out. And the things that were taken out, I still feel today, are things that are not just a sign of the time, and it's not just messing with artwork. It's actually giving a different sense of what was going through the author's mind in the way they described the character. So, for example, when a character met somebody, things were omitted that suddenly this wasn't a special moment between two characters. It was just whitewashed. It was blank. It was neutral. It was a passage that wasn't important anymore. And that's when I went up to my library, climbed up there. And Calvin and Joe, you know my methodology when I record a video. I do it warts and all. I don't do second takes. I did 7 takes of this video because I was desperately trying not to make it so people would start a war. That people would be like, yeah, David, good for you. And the torches would come out and pitchforks. And also Ian Fleming Publications would be burned to the ground because, this seemed like it was an interesting choice, either built upon, as Calvin, you said, possibly commerce, PR, or a new generation of Flemings who were trying to right the wrongs of the past. I don't know. But Calvin, let's go backwards now. What were your suspicions of why this was done to begin with?
Oh, as you said, commerce, particularly because, I think Fletcher and Joe both talked about the Roald Dahl thing. And sure enough, after a week of nonstop media coverage about how Roald Dahl stories are being changing, what starts, going up in the Amazon book chart? Oh, the original collection and all that. I don't think that Ian Fleming Publications turned all this around within a week or two to sort of get on the train. I'm sure that it was going on concurrently. But yeah, ultimately, I think it does come down to Ian Fleming Publications. It's in the name. You need to get people reading Ian Fleming and buying the books for this to sort of work and exist. And I think we live in a culture now where people are I'm trying to think of how to phrase this correctly. I think that people perhaps are less willing to separate the art from the artist like they might have been at one point. And I think some people might well read a Fleming book and see some really abhorrent, horrible language in there that doesn't reflect the culture that we live in today at all. And they might well put that book down and think, well, I'm not going to read anymore because that's really nasty and unappealing, and I just don't want to subject myself to that, which is all well and good. I would say fine, if that is a challenge and that is difficult to read, fine, don't read it. I think they're trying to kind of get ahead on that by desensitizing it. And as you say, David, I think it's you know, there is some really obvious, like, super racist terminology and language, like, in those books, which is like, okay, but when, like, you probably have more of an insight into, you know, the more, you know, bigger changes than me. I, you know, just read a few articles about it, but there are some changes that are just kind of like, oh wow, that's changing the whole meaning, and it's I don't know, it's it feels like it's gone a bit deeper than just sort of, you know, finding, you know, a few words and just changing them out for something else.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think that's what it is. Sorry, I was getting off on a bit of a tangent there, but ultimately, I think it is to sell more books to a new generation. Ultimately,
Yeah. And Joe, I mean, that new generation, you spoke about that in your video. I mean, it was you're right, it was mushy, but it was heartfelt, where you mentor and teach kids, you know, as part of, you know, your church, you know, goings. And I was moved to hear that, but a part of me also felt like, well, hold on a second. I mean, you're not saying Ian Fleming's books are now going to be handed to children, I mean, with these changes.
No, yeah, I mean, it's
That was a
hard
slow no, by the way.
well,
No.
well, I mean, I guess it depends how you mean. Like, I mean, you know, do I think that they did this with children in mind, that now all of a sudden these are going to be a little more adolescent friendly? Hard to say. And I think Calvin's point about commerce is spot on and absolutely 100% correct. Although I also wouldn't discount, if I mean, again, if we're thinking in terms of motivation, I wouldn't discount that I think the people who behind this are also still kind of true believers in the cause. And I think that they, you know, really did take some time to go through this and give it what I think they called a sensitivity workover. So I certainly wouldn't discount that either. I do think that, you know, they really felt that this was a thing that needed to happen. And again, whether or not that's the right way to do it, I don't know. And I thought when you were talking about the level of edits, you know, it's funny, as we sort of go through and discuss the topic, it does sort of, there is sort of a spectrum in terms of how we sort of approach this or react to it. And, you know, on one hand, it's like, you know, it's artistic doctrine, and how dare we touch a single word on it. I mean, you certainly wouldn't pull a painting off the wall 10 years later just because you feel that your technique has gotten better, so you want to work on it some more. You would simply just do another painting, and you would show your improvement along the way. And I think one of the things that we sort of compared this to, again, on one hand, there's the censorship issue, but we also did sort of liken it to George Lucas going back and tweaking his work. And again, I like that analogy jumped to my mind as you were speaking, because you were saying it's not just polishing some outdated special effects, it's Greedo shooting first. Like it is actual changes in character, in motivation, etc. So yeah, I would, again, just to sort of bring it back to your question about motivation, I would say that the people involved did probably genuinely also feel that they really wanted to do this. And again, it's something that is becoming popular in culture. You know, I won't go as far as to say there's a culture war and everybody's taking sides, and you get, but I think there is a little something to be said for that, in that this is something that is current. It is something that is today's generation that is doing. And I think they said, all right, are we going to sit on the sideline, or are we going to take a step and get into this and make changes that we see fit?
Well, let's talk about culture, because and I want to be very authentic to our viewers and to the three of you as well. I didn't prepare anything with Fletcher or say, hey, what's your opinion on this ahead of time? But Fletcher, you know, I do want to ask you, you know, and talk about the obvious. I mean, you know, some of the terminology that was changed and edited, some of the very offensive things, as Calvin mentioned, which would be offensive, I would hope, to anybody in the world today, yesterday, and many years ago. But it's also a part of the writing. Were you celebrating the fact that those things were changed as an advancement, or will you stay kind of shaking your head like, what are we doing here?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely the latter. Again, you know, these are books, text, source material that was written in originally in the 1950s. And so, you have this text that was written in a specific period of time, in a certain moment of time. And that was what it was like. That was the culture. That is how society was. It doesn't necessarily make it right, but Fleming was, writing what he knew. That was, that was his truth. That was his reality. And so, when you're trying to change things, 70 years later using the lens of 2023, I mean, it just rings kind of hollow. I mean, it's not authentic. It just seems like, I mean, I can't even articulate the word right now because it just seems so unnecessary. I mean, it's just like, why? The other day, I actually, this is how you know I'm a big Bond fan, because I wouldn't typically do this, but I spent 2 days calling up, because it was raining and I didn't want to go out. So I called up several bookshops and I was asking them, I mean, again, this isn't scientific, this is purely anecdotal. I called up several bookshops and told them and asked them, listen, you work in a bookshop, you're surrounded by books all day. What's your opinion on censorship of books, of certain books? And going back to what Joe and Calvin were saying about commerce, interestingly enough, they all said the same thing, and that was they didn't think that when it came to the new Bond books celebrating the 70th anniversary, that they didn't think it was really going to change anything financially, but in their own opinion, they agreed with me. They was, saying that they didn't think it was right purely because it compromises the artistic integrity of the original works of the writer. And I 100% agree with that. It doesn't matter what it was that they were saying. If there is an issue, I mean, everybody said this. David, you've said this. Calvin has said this. Everybody has said this. Just write a disclaimer that this story or this book contains certain text and language that one may find offensive. It's as simple as that. Yeah. That's all you need, And if somebody chooses to continue to read, great. If not, if it's not for them, great too. But you don't need to, change the original works of the writer to appease, an audience of 2023 from a book that was written in 1950. God knows what. So
I love the fact that you did some field research. I mean, that's more preparation than any of us did collectively. But I will say this: there was actually a passage. To your point, there was a passage that was changed, and instead of them thinking that, oh, this will make it a little bit easier on the ear, it actually made it worse. And I'll cite the passage, but there was a part where Bond met in the tropics a doctor, and the doctor was a black doctor. And so Bond said, I met the black doctor. Now, you could tell that what Bond was reacting to was in the 50s to have a black man who is a doctor in the tropics was highly unusual. And therefore, this gentleman was incredibly competent and accomplished. And literally by taking away that word, you now negated Bond's referral or almost like admiration of this individual that he just met, and it changes the tone and tenor of that passage and the connection with the character. And that's what I mean by some of the omissions, which I think a lot of us, you tell me, this is a bit of a free-for-all. Was anybody here scratching their heads that they chose some things to edit and they left some things in? Calvin, what do you think?
Oh yeah. Like I say, all I know is from the articles that I've read that I know that there's apparently still some racist language in there describing Oddjob, who's a Korean character. There's some homophobic terms still in there. Mm-hmm. So it is like, okay, I'd love to know what the rules for these sensitivity readers who suggested these changes were, because I'm curious to know, okay, well, why are these things being changed and not those things? But I think that is a slippery slope to go down. As I think we've all said, these were of their time, and it's such a personal thing. It's Fleming. It's he's the author of these books, and yes, he may well have had notes from editors and publishers and whatever, but it is his worldview and his perspective. And yeah, he was a snobby aristocrat, and he was get a raging hard on at any mention of, you know, British Empire or whatever. So it was kind of like, okay, well, this is his opinion, this is his view of the world. And it's interesting, actually, I think, when you read through those books and you see his worldview change as, you know, his language evolves as those books go on. And again, I think that's interesting from a historical perspective. So yeah, I think it's a shame that it's been so selective, but at the same time, it's a slippery slope to go down, because when you start to get into, it's not just the really obviously offensive terms, it's stuff like what you cited about just removing the race of that doctor changes that impression. It changes the perspective, the story, and the context, I guess. Which is a slippery slope.
Yeah, and it's a different stroke of the artist's brush that changes these things. I mean, Joe, you're definitely, out of the four of us, just listening in this, you know, the first few minutes, I think you're definitely, which is, I don't know what's been happening to Joe the last 2 years. Maybe it's being a grandfather or getting married. He was never like this, people. He was never like this. But you are definitely the most embracing of this. How far would too far have been for you not to be as embracing?
Well, I think I'll tell you, I think that's an easy question to answer, because I think too far would be if they made the changes in the text and put out these new editions and, like George Lucas, banned the sale of the existing, like, you know, did something to say, and now you can't get the old ones either. So I sort of feel like, in a way, I don't mind it too much as long as the other ones exist. But yeah, you're right. That's why I said earlier, I was a little mushy on this, because I kind of feel, I think it's partial. Well, it's two things. One is, once you start getting the grays and the beard, you start to soften up a little bit. You start to just be a little more, you know, you sort of go with the flow a little bit more. The other part is I think I was probably a little too subtle, because I think there's still a very much a part of me that's saying, to try to look a little extra intelligent, and I'll quote Shakespeare, I'm not here to praise Caesar, I'm here to bury him. I mean, I am here to say this is the passing of an era where you could say these sorts of things and it was just okay. And again, I'm a weird one, because I'm kind of, you know, again, I am older, so I'm kind of old school. And I've always, like I said, I don't want to get political in any stretch, but I've always sort of considered myself somewhere in between, like a George Carlin liberal and a South Park conservative. And at the end of the day, the theme is that, you know, I don't want a lot of silly talk about silly stuff. Just be real, and let's talk about reality. And I sort of feel like George Carlin used to do this great bit about just how all of the language just keeps changing. We constantly change language to soften it up and make it a little more agreeable to everyone. And again, it to me, it's kind of a little bit of an exercise in sort of silliness. But again, with that said, I also can, like I said, with Roald Dahl, I kind of thought it was very silly, because the entire point of his books, again, cautionary tales. I made a joke that Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory is basically 7 for children. It's like the 7 deadly sins, and all the kids, they all get bumped off according to their own failings. But I look at Bond, and then I get to a chapter that says, you know, N-word heaven, and it's like, oh yeah, okay, that I could see somebody wanting to jump in and say, maybe this is not okay today. Yeah. But again, I am kind of old school, and one of the things I said was, you know, back in, I do sort of opine the idea that we spend an awful lot of time, you know, dealing with just changes in language, changes in terminology, things that yesterday were okay, today are not okay. You know, like I remember being young, and, you know, the N-word wasn't the end of the world. It was obvious. It was always meant to be a shot. It was never meant to be polite, but it was kind of no worse than any other, you know, slight that you would say to a friend, that like an Irish person or an Italian person or an Asian person, etc. But again, you still sort of walked around with the idea, like, well, if I hear it said jokingly to a friend, I don't care. You walk up to one of my black friends and I hear somebody say it, and again, you understand the intention. Well, somebody's going home with a busted jaw. You know, like there's a difference. The intent was much more the active thing.
This
So
might be a good time to break in and say the views of Being James Bond do not necessarily reflect the views of Calvin Dyson, Fletcher, or David Zaritsky. Go ahead, Joe. Continue, please.
Yeah, like I said, they get the gray hairs. You start to say stupid things, but again, but that the whole point of what where I'm getting though is that with all of that said, today somebody hearing that word today, not understanding the context of where Fleming was back then, not understanding that it wasn't necessarily meant to be as angry and as hateful as it is today. So I do sort of understand. I guess we have to take that word out today because again, it means something much different today than it did back when Fleming said it. So again, maybe you do change things to be more acceptable. I mean, one of the things I sort of referenced also, there are Catholic prayers that get changed over generations. The language changes, verbiage changes, and I mean, and if you can change literal religious doctrine over the years just to make it more understandable as the generations, then I sure as heck can see that get changed and be okay with it.
So it's interesting too, because Fletcher, I want to get your opinion on this. Fletcher started off by saying it just seems strange to do this in the year that we are celebrating 70 years of this work that really has been unchanged. And I know that this also, obviously connects to the family getting the rights to this again. So if you think about it as a coming out party, here's the family with the publications. It's the 70th year. There are so many different directions, nostalgic directions they could have done to celebrate. Fletcher, I think you're right. I mean, it does seem strange to do this in this year. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you were going to celebrate, 70 years of Fleming's novels, I don't know, do a launch party or something, in one of, Fleming's haunts, whether it be Duke's somewhere, Duke's or any of the restaurants that he, frequented. But again, if we're I think it's important to understand what we're talking about here. It's supposed to be a celebration. So let's celebrate that it's 70 years of James Bond. This isn't a novel that was written ago. It came and went. And then, this book was written 70 years ago. No, it's Bond has survived and lived for 70 years. So that's something to celebrate. And when you look back along those 70 years and we see the language that was used, and then we look at the continuation writers. I mean, if we look at Horowitz, for example, he's writing his novels around in that same sort of space that Fleming was writing Bond. The language is similar, but it's not as controversial as Fleming. So something like that. It's something to be commended and applauded, because you can see how things have changed. There's a progression, there's an evolution. What's the next 10, 20 years going to look like? What's the next 70 years going to look like in terms of how Bond is portrayed and written and his interaction with characters? But when you remove certain things like what you and Calvin were saying, there's context and intention of what Bond is thinking and how he relates to certain characters. Once that's removed, it that sort of allure has gone. That admiration or that surprise that Bond has for these characters, it becomes meaningless. Bond is he's not the poster child of depth, but at the same time, he does have dimensions to him, and we'd like to see that explored. But once you remove certain character traits, it just kind of renders the character ineffective.
Yeah, and not just the character. I think you're right. I mean, you mentioned this perfectly. The reader has a certain ineffective nature of what they come away with, because I know that when I pick up a book nowadays, one of the Fleming things, and I'm reading on a beach somewhere or something, and I come across something that's offensive, I cringe. I literally will kind of look around like, oh God. Now, that to me shows that we've had an evolution. I should be cringing in 2023. So if we get rid of all these things, whether it's visual or video or artwork or literary that we cringe upon, how do we know how far we've come? How do we evolve? I mean, why can't we see the disgusting things and learn from those? Calvin, what do you think? Am I just coming across as an old white guy?
No, I mean, I agree, and I don't know if this is because I do watch a lot of old films. I read a lot of old books. Most of my favorite films are pre-1980, so I'm kind of used to bringing a certain historical context to the things that I watch and read anyway. But completely, I'm exactly the same as you. Like, there's some stuff, and you can see these on my channel when I talk, going through the books, and even like the John Gardner continuation novels from the 1980s. There are things that you read, and you're like, "Whoa, yikes! That's that's something," and you kind of like, "Oh well, I suppose it was, either of the time or representing a certain the author's viewpoint or understanding about certain issues, certain subjects, but it tells you something about the time it was written. It tells you something about the person that wrote it, and I think that that's interesting. And you just need that, you need to be armed with the historical context to kind of I guess just not take it personally. Just you are observing this. You don't have to agree with it, you don't have to like it, but it's there and it existed, so there you are.
Yeah, I tell if I could capitalize on what Fletcher was saying too, I kind of feel like I've noticed recently, I think there's a big push. If you watch, you see some of the content that we're getting, there's a big push towards period pieces. It could be 80s nostalgia or even further back. And I think one of the reasons for that is because it's difficult to set things in today's time frame. Like, for example, to set a mystery, a traditional mystery today is very difficult because you got Google and iPhones and things like that sort of do a lot of the legwork for you, and it's not exactly exciting. So that's why I think a lot of content is going back in time. And I think one of the reasons why we would read a book from Fleming's time, if you watch Dr. No, one of the things you notice is, well, they spend an awful lot of time in the airport because, the plane coming in, they're in the tower, and because air travel was kind of a big deal at that point. And people who were watching this movie want to be sort of living that jet-setting lifestyle. So, the airport was a little exciting. And I think and that sort of kind of goes to what everyone is saying about if you start to homogenize material from back then, you lose that edge. You lose like you said, Bond's view of a person back then of a different culture. The whole reaction is exciting because, again, travel was not a big deal. People didn't meet people from other cultures all the time. So you would say, oh, wow, this person is different. And you would talk about what's different and how you see it. And again, the lens through which you see it is the lens of Fleming and the lens of Bond. So you start to wash all that away. What are you left with?
Well, I'm gonna probably answer that because I want to see how high your temperatures can raise, because I think we're very calmly, this is an intelligent conversation about this. The content that Calvin and Joe and Fletcher, your content here, has been very thoughtful. You weren't screaming or raving at anybody. What if a year from now, there's an announcement from Eon and Amazon that because of the modern audience, the Bond films are going to be edited to be a little bit more of the time, and certain things would either be changed or omitted, some things that maybe were thought of as misogynistic or offensive from any of the films. Calvin, let's start with you. Would you be a little bit more up in arms? Would you be even keeled? What's your sense?
Oof, gosh, that's a really good question.
Don't you wish you were drinking now?
It's tough because as much as I love the books, the films are, the most special aspect of Bond to me. I think to all of us, probably. I don't think any of us are bigger fans of literary Bond than film Bond here, but correct me if I'm wrong there. Gosh. Knowing what happened with Star Wars, and it's a completely different, set of, George Lucas was just tinkering to update effects, and, he wasn't, as far as I'm aware, changing because of, evolving, political and social sensibilities or anything like that. But how all that went down, and knowing that those original films are no longer really available unless I want to go on eBay, I guess, and get a really expensive laser disc or whatnot. I would be quite upset, probably. It's not in my style to bang my fist on the desk. I don't think any of us are really like that, and start shouting at the camera or anything like that. But it would be another level of sort of, quiet outrage, I suppose, on my part.
And Fletcher, same to you. I mean, what I'm hearing from Calvin, which I think I'd feel similar, is the movies are kind of like hallowed ground. So if this was to happen, I mean, where would your reactions fall?
Well, I mean, I had a certain reaction with the novel. So, for me, just like everyone else here, the movies are, really it for me. It's my entry point really into Bond. And, if they start messing with that, I'll probably go all over, create accounts all over social media and start, getting myself banned. No, on a serious note, I would be highly cheesed off. I would not be happy. And again, I feel because Bond is so popular, he's an easy target and is often used either as a scapegoat or as a scapegoat, the first person, the first, sort of IP to sort of be thrown under the bus, for certain things. And, that would really be taking the cake. As they say, I'm trying to keep the language very clean right now.
Well, you went as far as saying cheesed off, and I'm pretty offended by that, being lactose intolerant. No, but I think it's a good point, because here's the problem. I think that if we really drill it down to the movies, for example, what you're talking about, Fletcher, the reason I even threw that out is because it's incomprehensible for us to think about the movies being tweaked. But here, the books are coming out. I think somebody had said, I think it was Roland Hume had said, they're in warehouses. Like, as much as we can cry and create content, they're coming. They're here. The new covers are out. And now, what are people praying for? They're praying for the hardbacks, to actually be the original ones. I don't know, people. I think this is what we have now. And Joe, as much as your whiskers are telling you to embrace all and love everything, the movies, would that be a bridge too far? Excuse the pun.
Probably, but I think my response would be very similar to how I sort of started out, where I sort of said,
I'm sorry, we lost the feed on Joe. We'll have to. No, I did not lose the feed. That was terrible. I'm sorry, Joe. You don't have to agree with everything, but who are you? No, go ahead.
No, I think like I said, I think it would go back to my original sort of response, which was sort of just to say, I'm not here to praise Caesar, I'm here to bury him. I think, again, this is really kind of, even though I'm sort of just making peace with the idea that this is happening, I am at the same time just mourning the loss of the original works of Fleming. And if I could just to kind of repeat or maybe say in a better way what I was sort of saying earlier, I wish we can go back to a day where intent was the more important thing. If it's not intended to be offensive, then let's just sort of be okay with it. And again, when people talked at one point about taking who's the guy who started the I'm having a brain fart. The producer who was sexually harassing all the girls and ended up going to jail. Harvey Weinstein.
Weinstein?
Yeah.
Yes.
He was like, when there was talk about removing his names from the credits of the films that he had worked on. I mean, like, guys, come on. Again, you're getting carried. Now you're getting into the weeds of silliness. I mean, what's the point? So yeah, when you talk about it happening to the films, if the films had gotten the same treatment, and with the books, I mean, for years, like you guys have been saying, like for some reason, James Bond has always been sort of a lightning rod for all that's wrong in the world, and the next James Bond should be X or Y, and we've always sort of said, well, why James Bond? Just make your own content. If you don't care for it, go make your own thing. And now that they're actually starting to change the verbiage in the books, the rubber is now hitting in the road. So now we're sort of forced to confront the problem. Yeah, if they change the films, again, I'll just keep my copies that I have now and live out my days in my cabin somewhere in the woods, and
away from humans.
Exactly.
Yes. Well,
just say good luck, folks. I don't know what to tell you.
I want to give credit, hopefully where credit's due, with IFP, because I would imagine they did, as Fletcher did, maybe even a little bit more, some research to understand that the fans of Fleming's novels are not just the David Zaritsky's. And for those of you who are listening to this, I'm pointing to my face and hair, the old white guys. I hate to be like this and say that, but they are all different colors, shapes, genders, proclivities, religions. I mean, look at the Bond community. Look who has channels and are talking about it. And they're all celebrating Bond. I mean, there's nobody sitting here that has a channel right now who is, out for blood. They all love Bond. You may disagree with their opinions, but they're all passionate about James Bond. And they read the same books that we've been reading, to Fletcher's point, for 70 years. And yet they're still James Bond fans. So if they're not looking for them to go into schools, which even Fleming said this is not for school children, and if it's a commerce thing, why wouldn't they attract more of their audience, which, by the way, can be anyone? It's not just the people that own the books. It can be any shape, gender, or religion. They have 70 years of proof. If this was a market research thing for a marketing company like I have, they would get an F, unfortunately, because they would have found that their audience is much more diverse, much more resilient, and much more excited to read the original ones. But am I talking crazy?
Not at all. Not at all.
No.
Who's going to dare to take that one first?
Yeah.
It was a little bit of a free-for-all. You can tell.
I'll actually say, it's interesting because there is a part of me that wants to agree with you and say that.
Which part? Your lower half?
Well, the idea that it's a marketing fail, that they're kind of going against their target audience, and therefore it's probably going to do more harm than good. I would probably err on the idea, and maybe I'm mischaracterizing what you're saying, but I would sort of err on the notion that even bad publicity is good publicity. So
yeah, to me, it's not. I'm not saying it's a marketing fail. If they truly did think that their audience was their new focal audience had these sensitivities, that they had to change these things, that's the fail. It's the market research aspect. This is a marketing win. The fact that I've got some of the biggest content creators in the entire Bond community still talking about this on this channel says that it was a marketing win. They get an A+, because if they had an intention of just people talking about this, I mean, look, if they had the covers with no changes, we would have all probably purchased them. They would have gotten their money, but it would have been news for about a week and a half, 2 weeks. Maybe we do something to celebrate it. This is just going on and on. So that's what I meant by a fail, that if they truly believe this is their core audience. I don't believe, I'm sorry to say, if they truly believe that there is a 10-year-old youngster out there, or somebody who, has an eggshell personality, if they think they're going to go to the bookstore, by the way, bookstore, please, or even buy a book, please. But let's say they do. Let's say in some fantasy bubblegum world, they go to a bookstore, titter. They're going to go, I could get that book, that book, that book. You know something? Instead of Captain Underpants, I'm going to go over and get this thing that says 007 on it in neon lights. Done. Or a thing with a hummingbird on it. Done. That's what I'm going to crack open.
Yeah. No, I hear you, and right, meaning they think that there's a demographic that would have bought an Ian Fleming book had it not been for some of the offensive language, and now they're going to attract those people. No, I I agree with that wholeheartedly. But again, I think the bigger win, like to Calvin's point, is it's just the notoriety of what's happening will get Ian Fleming on people's tongues. So it's almost like one of those situations where, you know, we're going to give you the razor for free because the blades are really expensive. You know, we're going to say that we're marketing to this group to make the books nicer for them. In reality, all the people who never even thought about Fleming now are thinking about him.
I hate it when Joe makes sense. I really does not give me pleasure. Calvin, we're in a 70-year celebration. Can we still celebrate this? Is there too much controversy and discussion over this to celebrate?
That's a very good question. I think that we can and should still celebrate it, to be perfectly honest. Maybe if it's not with these particular editions necessarily, but these have been in print for so long. Obviously, there are so many wonderful versions. I'm sat, you know, here next to the folio collection, which is absolutely lovely. I did dig out as well my first ever Bond book that I ever bought, which is this. It's not a first edition, sadly. It's a book club edition, so I'm told it's worth nothing. But found this in a bookshop in Haworth, up in the north of England. Bought it for £4. You can still see the price in there, and I was just thinking like, oh well, you know, I bought this when I was like 13, 14, something like that. Took it on holiday with me and read it as, you know, poolside read as Fleming intended. You know, I was still in school, so maybe that part of it wasn't as he intended. But you know, I still have a lot of nostalgia about reading those books for the first time and how it sort of really did take my Bond fandom to the next level. And I hope that through this 70th anniversary year, I mean, David, you've been doing this for years with your book clubs anyway, but I think it is, you know, no better time for Bond fans in particular, if they haven't read the books, to get involved and, you know, start reading them through. Because I really do think it does take your appreciation of this character and this whole franchise, if I'm going to use that term, to the next level. And I think it's going to be, you know, up to people like us on, you know, YouTube, Instagram, with podcasts, Twitter, you know, whatever, to sort of, you know, fly the flag and, you know, make videos, make podcasts and posts about, you know, how much we love this stuff.
I love that. Very positive, as you should be. And I love the celebratory attitude. Fletcher, do you have the same thing, that we should, regardless of the controversy, regardless of the changes, should we be in this celebratory mood?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if anything, I mean, we are celebrating 70, or we're supposed to be celebrating 70 years. So if, you know, if IFP aren't going to necessarily do that in the way that we'd hoped, I mean, we can do that ourselves. I mean, look at what happened during the pandemic. The film got pushed back, you know, years, and, you know, look what came out of that. Look at how we were sustained, you know, and we have you to thank a lot for that. So yeah. But, no, all of you, yeah, exactly, all of, you know, all of you and others. So it's the same thing here. 70 years is a big deal. We can do book clubs. I actually want to revisit you know, the Young Bond novel. I'm not sure if you guys have read those, the Young Bond novels. Those are really good. Again, you know, it's taking Bond back to his, you know, his roots, you know, as a kid, and then, you know, work my way up to Fleming's novels, and, you know, just read throughout the whole year. However you want to do it is entirely up to you. You know, small book club, big book club, online book club, doesn't matter, as long as you're reading something that's Bond and you're, you know, something that you're celebrating. So yeah, it's an opportunity to do something literary.
I love it. Yeah, both of you guys, great ideas, very positive. We want to make sure we kind of end this on a positive note. In fact, it makes me almost want to skip Joe, but I'm not going to. We're brothers. That's why we can dig at each other like this, people. We're professionals. But Joe, same thing. Maybe you're going to even celebrate more. Will you celebrate by purchasing these new edited versions?
I will probably not purchase. In fact, I even said when this first happened, I said, boy, they are really going to have to come up with some great cover art for me to even consider making these purchases.
How'd they do?
Fair. I mean, I thought they were okay. I feel like, you know, some of the artists that we know in the Bond community could have done as well, if not better. But yeah, I don't know. I don't see. I don't see a whole lot of point, particularly because, again, like you said earlier, had it simply been a matter of just, changing some particularly offensive language, that I might have even been very interested to read them and say, okay, maybe I'd like to see what it feels like to read these books without those distractions, which, again, today are very distracting. But if it really is going to go that deep and change a lot of scenes that, again, otherwise just give us flavor, as I would call it, I don't really see the point in going down that road, frankly. But I certainly would be very happy to dust off On Her Majesty's or Casino just to get me a taste of good old Fleming and some of that Bond flavor that I like.
And by the way, there is, and I don't know how far they are, there is a project going on right now where somebody is reading from the very beginning all the way through and marking the changes. And somebody came along and is helping the person, even electronically through AI, to check that out as well. So very shortly, and I don't know how shortly, could be a day, could be a week, they will allegedly have all the changes just by a fan going through them, which will be very interesting to go through them. And you know what? Maybe this is, a tsunami in a teacup. This is maybe nothing much. And there's a couple passages. Casino Royale supposedly is not supposedly, it's not changed at all. So if you wanted a book that was unchanged, that you wanted to give away, that was brand new. I do think you're right, though. I think mentioning the covers is worthy because some people looked at the covers and said, I was really hoping for an exciting cover. And can you imagine a Ruben Wakeman, Sean Longmore, Billy's Bond art type cover? Any one of them could have just blown it out of the water and would have put their passion and blood into it.
Yeah, 100%. And they weren't bad, but yeah, just not going to make me run out to, like you said, the proverbial bookstore if it still existed.
Yeah, true. All right. So, gentlemen, first of all, thank you. I know that in your own ways, you've talked about this before. I wanted to get the different opinions. I wanted to have this chat. Call it therapy for me, but I do appreciate the fact that all of you, all of us have talked about celebrating this. I mean, I could think of nothing more special, even in my mind. Danielle and I love going to GoldenEye and going there and having a 70th celebration of Fleming on his own home ground, or doing something special like that, or doing something even at home where you read a book and you talk about that book. So I think all those ideas are great. Down below, let's keep it positive in the comment section. What ideas do you have to celebrate the 70th anniversary of Ian Fleming's Casino Royale? We'd love to hear. But in the meantime, Fletcher, Calvin, Joe, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, David.
Thanks for having us, brother.
Thank you so much for hosting.
Love it. No, it wouldn't be the same without you guys. I'd be just talking to myself as usual. But in the meantime, let's get back to things. This has been David Zaritsky for the Bond Experience. We'll see you all real soon. Take care. Thanks for watching this episode. If you want to be up on the latest from the Bond Experience, just click on this subscribe and subscribe to our channel. You're going to get all the latest and greatest information, plus some exclusive content. And by the way, speaking of content, here's something especially for you, just because we know you. Talk to you soon.